Good afternoon, everybody. It is Wednesday, the 22nd of February. You're here at Lunch and Learn. Today, at the recommendation or suggestion of one of our attendees, Richard's going to be talking about the cognitive performance tests and, talking about, how you understand them, how they were developed. He's going to give you a good overview of all that. So we're getting folks unmuted, and once he gets everybody unmuted, he'll start off with talking about the tests. And there we go.
Yeah, I'm always pleased when somebody asks about them because they're underutilized and probably a little bit of a mystery to some people. May feel a little bit out of reach, unsure of how to use them, and that's reasonable. I mean, if you haven't done a lot of psychological testing, it's a mysterious thing in a lot. And if you haven't taken courses in it, in psychology or counseling, there's a lot not known about it, so you don't do it like anything else. But we've made it available in a way that's really easy to use. We've made it as simple as we can for clinicians, and it's another set of tests though, so that often puts people off. And there's a bunch of tests on there, and what do you use and how do you use it is always a question. And so we're trying to answer that to some degree today. So I think the best thing is first tell you what the tests are. Where do they come from? Okay, they're from the New Mind database. There's an N of 900 that we used, and so we statistically normed it. So we had people who were relatively normal. We had most of the people were just clinical, and then we had the test norms, because what you have to understand is we didn't make these tests up. They are in the public domain. They're so old, they're in the public domain. But if they're old, how could they be good? And that's a perfectly American way to think of it. It's not the latest thing. It must be missing something. But the truth is, these tests have been used, some of them for 100 years, and nobody's ever improved on them. And the norms are published. So we just took the published norms and we compared them to the norms of the people that we had that we thought were normative, and we compared it to the people who had problems. And we did that to be sure of the validity and reliabilities, and those are the two measures which are most important in research and testing, to make sure that it was very good. And then the other thing that you want to know is, if taking it several times make people better at taking the test, and will that slant the test? Well, that is covered under the original research done for them. So these are neurocognitive tests, which you can find on psychological testing, on educational testing, on neuropsychological testing. They're on all kinds of test batteries. And we just put them in computerized form, and we had to test people with them, and that's why the N of 900, to determine, do they work as well on the computer as they do as a written test, or did at least somewhat good. It has to be fairly accurate. So the digit span is a famous test. I think that goes back to 1917 or close to it. It's an ancient test, and the best experts in testing tell us that the digit span is the best general estimate of G, which is general intelligence. That the term they use is G, that we've come across. So if you don't do any other test, just doing that, the digit span, will give you a really good idea of functioning, especially for people who've been in an auto accident or they look like they're in cognitive decline. You can just get an idea of how much they're impacted, and you give them that test. And that's the short-term memory, and you have to give it to them in visual and auditory form to really tell. Okay, so you can do that one only, and that's a good first test to check out. Most of the tests are under 5 minutes, and they can be taken at home, and they will work, but you have to use a mouse. You can't have people taking this test, on something that doesn't involve a mouse, a tablet, for instance. It won't work on a tablet because the speed of the mouse is critical. So with a mouse on a computer in a quiet place, the average person can take this test and get a pretty good score that's accurate. Now, with these tests to be really accurate, the best way to give them is with pencil and paper by a neuropsychologist who's trained in a setting. That would be the most accurate. But we're not going after that. We're getting an estimate of what a neuropsychologist would find, and we're doing pre-post to see, really, is there a change that's good? And that's all you want. Now, if you think somebody's damaged and they should be tested by a neuropsychologist. But if he comes back on all these different parameters, you can estimate what he's going to find on his post-test on the neurofeedback by using these tests. And anybody can use them because the way we've presented them, they're not a formal neuropsych. They're just an estimate of what a formal neuropsych would be. Okay. If you don't know what kind of test to give people, they are auto-selected. I mean, the database goes in and picks where there's a problem and auto-selects the tests for you. And it does that by looking at the dashboard when you have, and I'll go over it, and it estimates from the dashboard the best test. So you don't have to be an expert to know which tests to do. So let's talk about it a little bit more. This is the comprehensive report. It's very simple, and it's an output from the testing. The more tests you have, the more show up, and these are all of them right here. And it tells you the average performance of a computerized performance test of the new mind, of this adapted form on the test statistically, what the average is, what's the below average, and what's the above average. So you see the range, and then you see the lowest score and the highest score among the population of the people in new mind. There's 900 that took the test. You get an idea, and you see under client what their score was. And any score that's red, they have a problem in those areas. And you don't have to be an expert. I mean, they tell you, if you're not, that, memory problem or filtering problem or executive functioning, which is abstract reasoning, and flexibility. And the executive function is actually the Wisconsin card sort. It's a tough test to take, and I don't give it unless somebody I think they have frontal lobe damage. And then I can tell from that test how much it's impacted their ability to be flexible and to think abstractly. Of course, when you do that, You're also testing whether somebody is concrete operational, or abstract. And there's 60% of the population is like concrete to concrete operational. That's why the newspapers write at 8th grade level. A small percentage of the population is abstract, you know, maybe 25, 30%. There's not much of the population is PhD, and you represent the upper portion of the population. You here listening. The most of the population can't keep up, which is not something to crow about. They could be if they were trained properly, but they weren't. So understand that you're also testing their socioeconomic status to a certain degree. So you might want to factor that in. Now that can't be factored in a simple test like this. That just have to, well, just ask what their level of education is, and that's actually the best way to tell. But it's pretty accurate, regardless of education. Then you have to rule those out when you're evaluating, and that's all been done by other experts. So you can see pretty well. Now, if you do the post-test, you'll see those red areas turn green or even blue. And it's simple as that. Well, you got more blue than you got green. It's like the stars on the training screen. You know, how many lucky stars do you have? I mean, I don't think we can get simpler than that. You know, most of the 5th and 6th graders can understand that. And how many red squares disappeared to give green squares? You've made an improvement. It's empirical testing. It's statistically validated, and they were accurate if they used a mouse. You know, and you weren't taking a lot of drugs and you weren't drinking, you know. I mean, that's obvious. Anybody have questions about what I just said that needs clarification? Okay, good. So how did we generate the problem areas? Because that's critical. That's like saying, well, I have a database and we did all this fantastic statistics. It doesn't matter how much statistics you did if your subject pool was tainted, and most databases have a tainted database. I mean, all the databases violate targeting theory and sampling, violate it seriously. But that's a topic for another day, and you got to be versed in targeting theory to understand the argument even. But the database generates a CEC, and how the client says they feel and where they have a problem is recorded in the CEC. And you see these little areas that light up, they have more meaning than just this here. That's the database internally looking at suspect locations based on their complaints. Okay, that's from the MRI literature. It's not totally accurate because we know there's more to it than that, but it's a beginning. It's a way. It's roughly accurate. It's as accurate as you can get with the science we have. So it says what areas are messed up, and this is a list of areas. They're called Brodmann areas, and the brain's divided into Brodmann areas. It's based upon cellular architecture and the corresponding 1020 sites. These have been confirmed by Loretta Imaging at the Loretta Institute. That's how we know they're accurate. And these tell us roughly what happens at each location. But you notice there's several locations here. So this is not a one location system already. Based on Loretta and on the MRI data, we know that all these functions are multi-location. In the year 2000, we knew that. But there were people still trying to sell the idea, and even today they're trying to sell the idea that there's a one-to-one correspondence. Oh, short-term memory, this spot only. Oh, auditory memory, this spot only. You know, and you just go down the line, and it's a game of, you know, where you got a bump here, you know, well, that bump means you have a problem with memory, and that bump means you have a problem with being nice, and that bump means you're mean. I mean, we went through that in late 1800s and gave it up a long time ago. So there's not a one-to-one correspondence, even from the MRI and Loretta literature, between a function and one location. But it's by looking at these groups, you roughly get an idea. And that gives us, narrows the areas to work at. It gives more accuracy. That's what we do at NeuMind, and it's all based on statistical probability theory. What are the probabilities that an area is involved? It's just what's more likely to be the case. And this shows you the 1020 to the areas that are Brodmann, so you can really see them. Now the CEC then looks at the level of deviance and the map, puts that there together, and then that constitutes the areas they have problems in. So if they have all problems in these areas, they're going to have problems in these areas. I don't know if, in fact, this matches this. They're just images to make it make sense. The CEC that they filled out, that they said they had problems in this area and that area, is correlated with areas that should be associated with that based on that chart you saw. And that is correlated with areas that are dysregulated in the EEG. And we look at a lot of factors that that make up that. It's 5 factors of neurometric measurement makes these lights light up. It's not amplitude only. So it's not a simplistic calculation.
And
Any
Richard, the
questions?
severity, the severity, when you see somebody with a CEC that says it's red, they've rated it, as severe, and then the map comes up yellow, it doesn't mean that they've overestimated or underestimated. It's just an agreement factor, right?
Yeah.
Whether that CEG is yellow or red, but when you have green under the CEC and yellow like the one below for categorization, that means that while they're not perceiving that difficulty, that it's a possibility that they could have a problem with it. That's how I explain it. It doesn't seem, I don't tell them they're wrong and the map is right. I just say it's possible you could down the road. And
well, it's not black and white. It's like that's green and so
right.
you won't have any at all. You could be a degree of loss of function which you have adapted to, and it might be mild enough so it's not bothering you. The degree of damage to the neural system below, which is the EEG, cannot predict the degree of personal experience. It's not possible,
Right.
just because of the fact that human beings individually habituate to the level of function, and
right.
that function varies tremendously. And that functional area, even given the connectivity confusion that, and I'll get in that in a minute, if the more education you have, And the more you've used your brain, the greater the fiber density is going to be. And there's lots of research on this. And an area that's compromised, whether it's you actually damage the neurons, or whether it's just inflammation, which is impeding their function. First of all, those are two different things. And that really affects people so differently. And if you have all these extra pathways, you can get around it. So people can recover a lot faster if they have more fibers. So you can begin to see it's really complicated. This is just a general way of getting a better idea. And you can't be black and white. And nobody, if you have somebody claiming to have total accuracy in this type of thing, run the other way. There's nothing in science now that allows them to do that.
Gotcha.
I jumped ahead. Did anybody else have a question? Yeah, okay. Just
I just wanted people, if there's people here that are newer to the system, they need to understand that that the EEG findings are based on what's the probability, low, moderate, high. So
yes.
There's that flexibility there. Yeah. Okay.
It's all probability. So
right.
You're not right and the client's not right, black and white. It's the degree to which you're right and aware of it. And a lot of times the map is a lot more accurate than the individual's assessment. And you can tell by using the computerized performance test to confirm it. So that's what it's doing. They said this, the map said this, the accuracy of the matching lights will be confirmed or disconfirmed by the computerized performance test. It will tell you how much. You can't tell how much from the map. If there's an area that's out in terms of the EEG, you can't tell how much, but the computerized performance test can tell you how much. And that's the value of them. That's what their purpose is. How much have you been compromised by this? There's no way, there's no person who can tell you that as well as a test. The tests are 90% more accurate than estimate of the clinician and far more accurate than the estimate of the individual. And in testing theory, they've known that for 50, 60 years. And they find the same thing every time. We grossly underestimate our capabilities, and clinicians are much better at estimating somebody's, but they're still way off. The test is very accurate, but it's not totally accurate, and that's the error, plus or minus 5 or 3, like they talk about on voting. It's the same thing with the test. How accurate? Plus or minus 5 or plus or minus 6 or 10. You go, oh, that's really not very accurate, but better than guessing.
So how soon after the client does this assessment can you repeat it? Do you have to wait a certain 7 days, 5 days to?
That's a gray area in testing theory, and
Okay.
depends on the retest reliability of the test.
Okay.
Okay. These tests have excellent retest reliability. I didn't estimate that. It was estimated by millions of dollars of grant money and years of research by other universities. And they claim these have very high reliabilities.
Oh.
And so you should be able to use these on a weekly basis. And I'll tell you, it's the reliability of the DigiSpan is fabulous. It's hard when you get into reverse DigiSpan. It's hard to learn that. You can't learn it unless you're functioning well.
Right. I mean, sometimes you get that the clients who have that competitiveness and they're like, oh, I wasn't in my right mind, or I didn't sleep well enough. And, when can I retake it? I need to retake it because this isn't really how I feel. And so
Well,
it's like they get very anxious about the results.
if it's the first time they've taken it, I mean, you can take it twice initially, you know.
Uh-huh.
If they say that, say, okay, well, let's just retake it again and see how you do. If it's grossly different, then you should do it a third time and see. And with that third time, should give you a more accurate estimate. You know,
Got it. Okay.
so you take a couple of times at the beginning. That's good. In fact, that'll improve your accuracy.
Okay. Super. Thank you.
But then you want to do it like every week. And actually, I prefer to do it every 4 weeks. 2 weeks it could be. It depends on how fast they change from the neurofeedback. If they come in and say, "Wow, my memory's working great," okay, let's see how much it is, and then we know how well you estimate your memory, and then you can give them the test and say, "Yeah, it is better," and you estimate now you still got a ways to go, but you noticed that, and we can rely on your report.
Now, how about also doing this remotely? Is it best that they're in the office or is it something they can do from home?
They can do it at home as long as they follow the rules. They're in a quiet room,
Okay.
no distractions. They're not exhausted. It's not done
Right.
after they've been beat up at work, or they're angry at their husband, or
Hmm.
whatever's taking place. You know, in a relaxed environment and with a mouse, you're going to get pretty accurate.
Okay.
Obviously, the best place to do it is the office. And people who are older, you're going to have to do it in the office, or people who are highly compromised. You have to sit on them. You have to watch and see how they're performing.
Right. Right.
So
Okay.
there are limits. Yeah, you have to be reasonable about it.
Sure.
Look them over. You think you can do it, and you send them home, and then you get the report. How was that? Did you find it hard, easy? And then you'll get an idea of whether you've got something good or not.
Right.
Dr. Soutar, I'm quite puzzled about doing the tests that often, as you kind of suggest, because I would think it would give the wrong impression of how fast neurofeedback really works. So I would have thought maybe not more than once a month.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Hmm.
I'm
And
totally with you. I only said that because some people they don't pay attention, or that might slip by, or they think they know better. They've just, people have all kinds of ideas. I can't account for everybody's uh, uh, construction of reality with respect to neurofeedback, and that's why I said at 2 weeks. I've seen people do it every week. Come on, be real. So I'm with you.
oh, and what age limit would you say? Because I guess some of these tests will be appropriate, maybe
I
not
I
young
would
children.
I wouldn't do it under 7,
No.
because some of this requires ability to read, and we have it normed down to 5, but the variance is so high, and we only test some of the tests because you couldn't read. You can't do list acquisition on a kid that can't read. So really, but some of them are symbolic and they don't have to read, and they can be done by kids. So we did them all, normed them down to that level on our system. But I really, you should stick to the ones that are symbolic if you go down that young, so there's no reading involved. And 7 or 8 probably is the earliest age that they could read those tests. So
Yes, absolutely.
be reasonable.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm curious, Dr. Soutar, about timing. We always know about the circadian rhythm in the later afternoon.
Yeah.
What's your thought about best timing?
Well, you just said it, Carl. It's the same thing about mapping. you get a more accurate estimate if it's done before noon. It can be done between 5 and 7 too, if they haven't generally, but afternoon it gets more and more inaccurate, so you should pay attention to that, and that's a good point. Very good point. And I said they're automatically selected, so out of the battery you will get, the software will automatically select these, these simple ones, but here's the whole battery, and you can go in and manually select them if you know what you're looking for and you feel confident that you understand what you're doing. So it's set up so an expert could use it, or somebody with limited expertise could use it, or somebody who doesn't know anything about it. It can be used. So again, know your limits. Each test explains what the test is about. So even if they're at home, they can read what it's testing, informed consent. Instructions tell you how to do it. You practice doing it because it has a practice test. If you're not sure, go back and read it again. Do the practice again. Do it until you understand what you're doing, that you can follow the instructions. And that's what a good paper and pencil neuropsych tester would do. And then you look at the outcome, and it tells you correct, incorrect, and response time. Now, we haven't given the norms on response time, and that gets down to neurocognitive testing. I don't know if we ever will. We just want this to be an estimate of what they would find, because we want this accessible to all of you, regardless of your background. We don't want the APA coming and saying, well, you can't use these tests. You're a counselor and you're not trained. And, well, yeah, that's right. But if you automate it and give the right instructions, there's no reason you can't. And also, you don't apply for insurance for the testing. I mean, yes, I tested him for 4 hours of this, and I get X number of dollars, and no, you didn't. You're not qualified. This is just for you, the therapist, and the client, to estimate what's wrong and how well they do. It's pretty accurate, but you have to go by the rules. Any question on that? And we have the tracking, and you can see what they do by date. So you can go in there and see the pattern. You can match it up to your symptom tracking and match it up to your neurofeedback protocols. You can see at what time in their training they started to change, how much they changed, and what protocol they were doing. So you can get pretty good with this if you want. We haven't done as much statistical analysis as we could with this, but there's only one of me, and I've got a lot of other things like answering emails of confused people that I have to do, and books I write and research to read, so I can't do it all.
I love that tracker. That is, you can't argue with that. When you're sharing this with whoever's, reviewing it, the patient and family. I mean, it's right there. This is great.
That's a great observation, and said by somebody who's used it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what I find valuable about them. So that has the comprehensive output. Now, I'm gonna go someplace different, but highly related. That's not what I want. There we go. This is the Brodmann 1020. Now, I put this together from the neuroimaging research up to the year 2000. I was the first one to publish it. Corey Hammond gave me the information. He requested it from specific, he and I got together. He requested it specifically from Loretta Institute. I asked Corey to do that because he was in conversation and he saw what I was doing and he wanted this. And so I put this together around 1999, 98, and gave it out at workshops. Well, it wasn't long before everybody else asked me. Dr. Thompson asked me, and NeuroGuide called me up, and he asked me for it, didn't have it, wanted it, and I could give you the list, but it's mostly a who's who in neurofeedback, and they all wanted it. And they all, several of them went on to build a more extensive list than this. But that was the beginning of this. And we all hoped that at that time, we were under the illusion of a one-to-one correspondence because that's what everybody was thinking, kinda. There's a lot of argument about it. But we were in neurofeedback. We didn't read all of the esoteric neuroimaging arguments. And we hope that you put an electrode on the site and you train them and they get better. One-to-one correspondence, the bad spot's there, you train it and you fix it. It became evident by 2005 that that was baloney. But the vendors were still selling that concept, ROI, train the ROI, and fix it. And it was back to the 1800s. And it wasn't realistic. It's not realistic. Don't take my word for it. Read the scientific literature, but don't read in the field of neurofeedback. That's not their area of expertise. Read Menon. I suggest Menon would be very good for you to read if you want to see if I'm on track. MENON. He's got tons of research. So you can't just train these areas and expect this all to work out. Now, why is that? So, let's see. I had drawn that up and had it ready. Sorry about that. I must have mistakenly turned it off. So, speaking of the devil, Menon, 2011, on a comprehensive review of what we knew about neural networks, especially large-scale networks, and their impact and how we might work with them. And this is right, a quote from his research. More recently, MRI activation studies have been used to more precisely demarcate nodes of specific functional circuits associated with dedicated networks. And he's talking about networks that perform a specific function, like working memory. However, regions of interest, ROIs, identified in this manner tend to vary considerably with task demands. So the function of an RI, its participation in that function, like working memory, depends to a great deal on the task you're doing. It may be involved more or it may be involved less. and there's a lot of tasks you can do with working memory. As a result, uncovering the nodes of neurocognitive networks in a principled and reliable manner so that it works has turned out not to be inaccurate, not to be somewhat accurate, not to be accurate, but elusive. And may I repeat, to be elusive. And you have these vendors selling, oh, train at this spot because that function is associated with that spot and it will get better. They have no research basis for saying that. There have not been experiments with it. And actually, from a theory perspective, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't hold water. It couldn't. It would violate everything we know now. So I have people saying, well, which tests, you've got your computerized performance tests, and I see that it's short-term memory or working memory. What's the location that I should train? Well, if you didn't know anything about it, that's a very good question. That's the question we started off with in the late 90s. They thought that was more accurately answered by brain mapping. That's why they invented brain mapping. But E. Roy John was living in a different time. We know a lot more nowadays. So I won't go into the details of ROIs because I could spend 2 hours just on that alone. But I think one particular thing that makes the point is here's working memory. Now, working memory is a hub, it's a star. It's a theoretical hub. It's not a place. It's a functional outcome in time space, hopefully, but it could be at a quantum level, so beyond time space. And that's very possible according to the research. But not to go down that rabbit hole, working memory has input from all of these areas so that it can work properly. So those are the nodes. The nodes contribute as a group to working memory function, like a choir singing a song, okay, in harmony. The song is not going to come out in all its glory with the harmony unless all the people in the choir are contributing. They must know it and they must do it, and if somebody's got a cold and somebody's got a bad foot, somebody's got a bad back, they may not do it so well. So the song might come out slightly off and, well, I can listen to it. It works. But it might be really bad when it's grade school kids singing a really complicated 4-part harmony production. You suffer through it. It's close to understandable, but it hurts. If you're a musician, it really hurts, but you listen. So that's the quality of your working memory, the quality of all of these putting into it. That's what you're measuring on reverse digit span, and not totally, but pretty accurate. And it's, there's other tests that measure it more or less accurately. And we could argue for a year about that. So each of these locations is somewhere else in the brain. So how could you train at F3 and expect all the other places to suddenly get good? You tell the conductor, well, you need to take more lessons and you need to get some more sleep, and the conductors, you got to do better. And the conductor's great, but his group has got problems. Different people got problems, so they can't sing the song. And it's everywhere in the brain. It's subcortical, and it's cortical. And it's all these different networks, and they all have to. So how can you do one place and expect them all to fall in line? You have to go, as they say, upstream. Any of these places, most of them would be upstream, and you would have to, address Mr. Jones' back problem and Aunt Millie's foot problem, and Jennifer's flu symptoms and the COVID symptoms, and you have to buck everybody up, and it gets better. So I think that's as close as I can come without in a short period of time as a good metaphor for this. So what do? Well, you train a bunch of locations. How do you decide? Well, you can't decide by the function, by measuring working memory. I mean, does that make sense that you couldn't know how these other areas are functioning by measuring working memory? You go to the map and you look at all the nodes, which are all over the map, all the 10, 20 areas, and you say, which one are dysregulated? And step by step, you regulate them and you measure the outcome. So you use the performance test to see where you have intervened, what locations you've intervened that are improving your performance on the test. And you can see it pretty well. An example, I had a woman who was, well, I had tons of people, but hers was really fun because I tested her very carefully and mapped her very carefully. And she had PTSD and head trauma. She was a dance instructor from an accident. And we trained her until she got all her movement back and she was able to dance again and she had her balance. And we did that with fast wave training by training the networks that seemed to be associated with that. But her verbal recall was still bad. And I want you to know, we had even done alpha theta because we had to do that because trauma subcortical networks had been interfering with her ability to move. And that shows you how distributed it is. But we got her movement pretty well resolved, but she couldn't explain to students. She couldn't tell them verbally, efficiently, instruct them, and she couldn't get it together. So I said, let's try the temporal region. I thought that would do it. And so we worked in the temporal lobes, and we worked at FP1, FP2, incident fasciculate, and the pathway to the frontal lobes. And the last place I did it was FP1, FP2. I thought, well, just to see if that helps. And nothing changed it until I got to the frontal lobes. And it was the frontal lobes took all those other networks and put it together. And it was the area that she was missing the function in. And if I had gone strictly by the 1020 and the correlates with the Brodmann areas, I would have only done half the job. So the moral of the story is follow the maps, I believe, in my experience with all of these things, because you can't tell from the symptoms, and you'll never be able to tell. It's just too messy. You might get lucky, and if you get lucky, then you say, oh, and you might get lucky twice, and it's possible. And say, oh, well, you always train there for this. It always works because it worked for my client. And then that word gets around and people start saying it, and suddenly everybody's telling you the wrong thing in workshops. So vet your information. You can watch my videos. They won't take you everywhere, but they give you a rough idea of what's known and what's unknown out there and how it applies. I've given this lecture. I was invited to give this lecture on networks at ISNR twice, and David Cantor and I both did 2-day lectures on this, exhaustive lectures of all the literature that a lot of people found and sent us. And some of them are really well-read people. I saw literature I never knew existed. I read it all, and David read it all, and we presented it. And it really changed our concept of all of this neurofeedback we're doing. And it really exposed the weakness in a lot of the fancy high-tech neurofeedback the vendors were proposing. And that's why Corey Hammond, remember, he's the guy who helped me start this all, published an article with Coben saying, you can make the equipment as fancy as you want, but we don't have research or knowledge that demonstrates there's any advantage. So I think that should wrap up the argument. Answer the questions. Anybody have any last questions?
This was fantastic. I'm really glad that you did this because we do a lot of these measurements. So you just kind of shed the light on some things that maybe I wasn't really familiar with, but I am very thankful for this talk. And I love this last part on the working memory, the hub interface.
Yeah.
Even, here as we do our functional medicine, when we're measuring when, someone has, mold toxicity and all of the other things as to how it's affecting the brain, pre and post one of these tests here. You just shed a lot of light on this, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I have a lot of personal experience, subjective experience with this, because I'm recovering from long COVID, and I can't even pronounce some of the words well at the moment. When I started 2 months ago, I couldn't speak, but now it's, I'm pretty good, and it's from neurofeedback and related technologies. But it's become even more clear to me when I've subjectively experienced it and analyzed it. When it happens, if you're in the field, your reaction isn't always, well, this is terrible. It's like, you're concerned, of course, but you think, this is fascinating. What an opportunity to learn. And you just analyze, test, map, and you learn what the animal is about from first person. And that helps you with people going through it. So I'm here to tell you, this long COVID thing is subtle. It's devastating for some people. I have people who are horribly devastated by it, lost their career. And treating it has to be taken on this way with great respect. It's a systemic training that has to be done, not a region of interest. So I think I'll finish up with that.
I think we're going to need a part 2 where we set it up for question and answers and perhaps some more conversation in this vein.
Yeah, we need some questions though. I mean, put the questions on the listserv. I have to tell you that Lauren Kilgore made an excellent post today. Read her post, and she's just reflecting what I just said, but she's somebody who is very thoughtful and has read a lot about it. And, she's keeping an open mind. That's what we have to do. But vet the workshop myths, always.
All right. Well, Friday, you're going to be talking about, using alpha theta. There's some questions about that. So we'll pick up with that topic on Friday. And if people have certain questions, you can certainly email them directly to Richard or to me, and then we'll sign up the questions for this workshop on this performance tests and other related topics, and we'll get to them all.
Yep. I love the questions. Send us questions. We'll see you Friday.
All right. Bye, everybody.
See you Friday, folks.